welcome ADIBA to Quarantine Pages. So you're recording, right, Adri? Okay, cool. So we'll be chatting with ADIBA today. The session will be recorded, so that's just a reminder to anybody who might want to take off their camera or whatever. So we're so happy to have you here with us, ADIBA. The first thing we wanted to talk about is your book. So if you could tell us a little bit about what the Henna Wars is and a little bit about who you are and all that kind of stuff.
So my name is ADIBA JAIGIRDAR. I'm a writer and I'm also an ESL teacher. I like writing books about queer brown girls, as you might have noticed from the Henna Wars. And I listen to too much Hayley Kiyoko and Janelle Monáe. So the Henna Wars is about Nishat, who is a Muslim Bangladeshi, and she's a lesbian. And at the beginning of the book, she decides to come out to her parents, but it doesn't really go the way that she expected it to. So she's kind of dealing with the fallout of that. At the same time, her childhood friend, Flavia, comes to her school. She starts a henna business, which is a rival henna business to Nishat. And she's not Bangladeshi, she's Brazilian, so she's culturally appropriating henna. So Nishat is kind of dealing with that fallout from her parents. She's dealing with her feelings for Flavia, and she's dealing with the fact that Flavia is culturally appropriating from her.
Nice, and it's an amazing book, by the way. So for those of you who haven't read it, you need to get on that like as soon as possible, right? And so there's so many different aspects of this book that I enjoy and that many readers enjoy. But what I want to know is what was some of the favorite things, or what was one thing in particular maybe that you enjoyed the most about creating the story?
So I think my favorite part was probably just writing all of the scenes where you could see Bangladeshi culture kind of like come to the forefront, because when I was a teen, Bangladeshi culture wasn't something that I felt like I could celebrate. I felt like it was something I had to hide. And obviously, in books, I never really got to read about Bangladeshi people. The first time I read a book with a Bangladeshi character was The Gauntlet by Karuna Riazi, which came out, I think, in 2017. So I was like a full blown adult at that time. So I just loved writing about all the different aspects of Bangladeshi culture that are really important to me, and to kind of celebrate that on the page and to also kind of show the world what Bangladeshi culture is like.
Yeah, and I mean, so we've already done an interview on my channel. And since our last interview, that was during your launch week, and we actually pre-recorded it even before your launch week. So now that the book is out into the world and has been getting a lot of positive reception, I wanted to know if you have any reflections on that and what's it like having your story out there and people reading it and enjoying it.
Yeah,
Especially
it's honestly, sorry?
and I said especially since it's a debut novel, so it's your first experience with that.
Yeah, it's honestly just been like really amazing, because I guess I didn't expect the reception that it got. Like on my launch day, the tweet that I sent out, it got like so many likes, so many retweets. And I could see so many like Bangladeshi readers saying that they'd never like read a book with a Bangladeshi person before. I saw a lot of Brazilian readers like writing in Portuguese. And I was like, I don't know what you're saying, but it feels positive to me. So that was really great, especially because I feel like Bangladeshi people and Brazilian people, there are two people that haven't had a lot of representation in YA literature. So I was just really glad that they could get excited about it. And I've been hearing a lot also from like queer brown readers who have like messaged me to say like how much they connected with the book and how much it meant to them. So that's been just amazing to see, because I remember when I was a teen, and I would have just loved to read a book like this that I could connect to, a book that told me that, you know, it was okay to be like queer and brown and Muslim. So I'm glad that readers can resonate with this book.
And that kind of builds off of the next question I was going to ask you as well. This is a story about, it's a sapphic romance between two queer girls of color, a Bengali girl and a Brazilian girl, and you don't really see like a combination like that too often. Oftentimes, when we see interracial relationships and queer interracial relationships represented in stories, it's usually like one brown person and then like the white main character, like the Simon verses and whatnot. So I was wondering, like, why did you think it was so important to? Obviously, you reflected on why it was important to represent those identities in your story, but why do you also feel like it was important to represent the relationship between those two characters? And between two characters of color that we don't usually see at the center of the stories that are mainstream in our publishing industry.
So actually, when I started writing the first draft of the Henna Wars, Flavia was a white character. She was like white and Irish. And the reason why I started writing it like that was, I guess, because I had read all of those books, like Simon Verses, where this was like the done thing. It was like, if you have an interracial relationship, it has to be like a white person and, a person of color. And then I realized that if if the Flavia character was white, the book couldn't really have a happy ending. And if it did have a happy ending, it would feel problematic to me. Just because, the power dynamics are very off with like a white person appropriating from a brown
Yes.
person. And what would kind of be the reasons for that that might make it okay? I couldn't find one when I like asked myself that question. So basically, about 1,000 words into writing the Henna Wars, I decided this is not going to work. This can't be a white person. They have to be like a person of color. And then I thought an Afro-Brazilian character would be the best way to do that because as an ESL teacher, I have had like a lot of Brazilian students, and many of them have been Afro-Brazilian. Ireland has like a huge Brazilian population, so most of my like close friends are also Brazilian. So it's just a culture that I know a lot about. I have a lot of respect for like all of the Brazilian people that I have met, and I feel very privileged to like learn about their culture. So I thought because I have certain insight into Brazilian culture, maybe this was something that I could write about and I could kind of analyze, I guess, like the differences and similarities of Brazilian culture and Bangladeshi culture.
Wow, and I mean, I really enjoyed that aspect of the story as well. And building off of that cultural difference between them, this is a story that essentially highlights cultural appropriation. So I wanted to know first of all, why did you want to center cultural appropriation as part of the plot of this story? Why did you feel like that was an important thing to talk to young adults about? And I also found it interesting about what you were saying in terms of it's a person of color culturally appropriating from another person of color. So the power dynamics are a little bit different than if it were a white person doing it. So I was wondering if you could reflect a little bit more on that as well.
So the reason why I really wanted to write about cultural appropriation was because I think it's not something that we talk about a lot. We talk about racism and like the stark um, ways that racism can happen, and we also talk about, I guess, like microaggressions, but we don't necessarily talk about cultural appropriation in the same way. And I think when we talk about cultural appropriation, we see it as very black and white. And especially, I think why people want it to be very black and white. They want to say, this is cultural appropriation or this is not cultural appropriation. And they want like these very straightforward answers. They want to ask, like, can I do this? Can I do that? But the thing is, cultural appropriation, like anything to do with like race, is very nuanced, it's very complicated, and I think it can be different from person to person, from culture to culture. For example, like I remember one of my white friends asked me, would it be like cultural appropriation like a salwar kameez? And I was like, well, I guess technically it wouldn't be because like a salwar kameez is just something that Bangladeshi people wear. But at the same time, I would feel really uncomfortable seeing that. So maybe it also would be. And we got to have like a discussion about that. And I guess I just think it's important to like talk about these things, especially because we live in like a globalized world. And I think so many things are kind of getting blurred right now.
Yeah.
And it's important to have these discussions. And it doesn't mean we need to have like an answer like, yes, this is cultural appropriation. No, this is not. It doesn't have to be black and white. I just think we need to be open to having these discussions. And I hope that we can have them, especially in YA, because, you know, teens need to be having these discussions, especially, I think.
Yeah. And you were also mentioning the difference of the power dynamics between like a white person culturally appropriating as opposed to a person of color. So I was wondering, like, if you could expand on like that difference so that people could understand the nuances and why you would have made that decision to make Flavia a person of color as opposed to a white person in terms of the politics of another person of color appropriating another person of color culture,
Mhm.
essentially.
So obviously, there's like a big history with racism with white people and people of color, especially when you bring like colonialism into it. I think that like it's very easy to see where that line is because white people have, you know, stolen from people of color historically. Speaking as a South Asian, they have literally stolen like everything from us. So like
Yoga.
yeah, so it's very clear to see where that line is, that why people have historically done this. They've literally stolen from us, and now they're culturally appropriating from us as well, which is also a form of stealing. But when it comes to people of color, it's just a lot more complicated because like Brazil doesn't have a history of stealing from Bangladesh. So what exactly does it mean to culturally appropriate? What is the history there? Like, what is the weight of that? So I think like that's just something that's important to navigate, and especially with Flavia being like Black as well, there's obviously very different power dynamics, because as like a brown person, Nishat possibly has more privilege than Flavia, but at the same time, Flavia is culturally appropriating from her. So I think like it was just interesting for me to try and explore all of these power dynamics. When I was writing the book, I actually got to have a lot of conversations about cultural appropriation with like a lot of my Black friends, a lot of my brown friends, even some white friends, and that kind of helped shape the direction of the book as well.
Yeah. And building off of talking about the power dynamics between white people and people of color, we recently saw with the hashtag publishing paid me a lot of things being revealed about the publishing industry. And I know that you were a part of that conversation. You sent out a tweet and it got a good bit of attention. So I just find it interesting that we are in a time where conversations about racism and inequality are now sort of catalyzing us to look at our own spaces, right? And so that means the publishing industry, the book community. So I wondered if you had any reflections on that as a person of color who recently published a debut novel and, learning all of the things that we've learned from this hashtag.
So I feel like I've seen a lot of people kind of get discouraged as they look through the hashtag. And also, I guess, with everything else that is happening in publishing specifically, I've seen kind of newer writers who haven't broken into the industry yet kind of say, do I want to be a writer? Do I want to be an author? So like that's something that I've seen that has made me like really sad, I guess. But actually, to speak about this, I want to share a little bit about my experience at my other job, which is teaching ESL. So I'm an ESL teacher, which means I teach English as a second language, and it's a big industry in Ireland specifically. And at my job, I have faced like a lot of bigotry from specifically from like my coworkers. So there's been Islamophobia, there's been homophobia, there's been like racism. So all of that stuff is things that I faced. And my ex-boss was gaslighting me and harassing a lot of the teachers. And so when all these things were happening, I didn't feel like I could bring it up with management, or when I did, I wasn't really supported. So I think like seeing all of the discussion in publishing these days, it's kind of made me realize that as a woman of color, in any industry, in any job, especially living in a white Western country, I'm going to have to face this. I'm going to have to deal with this, which is, just an unfortunate reality that I have to live with, and many of us have to live with. But in publishing, I can say that my agent is incredibly supportive. My publisher have been incredibly supportive. I've never felt like either of them have, asked me to change anything, just because they thought it was, too much.
Yeah.
They have helped me tell the story that I want to tell, and they've always been very supportive of me. So I guess like my major reflection from this is that if you are a new writer and you're seeing all of this happening, what you need is that support system. And I think that's what all people of color need, because I think when you have support, you can get through it, because, they are the people who are going to like be there for you as everything happens, because like you're not going to get away from the bigotry. The racism is going to happen, the homophobia, the Islamophobia is going to be there, but as long as you have a support system, you can make it through it.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. I agree with that. And it's been a lot to reflect on. So for those of you who don't know, by the way, because I feel like I probably might not have explained it for people who don't know, the Publishing Paid Me hashtag is a hashtag that was developed from authors in the community who have been basically kind of sharing the amount that they've got for their advances so that you could see the difference between what people of color are being paid versus white people. And it was a lot to talk about. So thank you for sharing that reflection, ADIBA. And now I want to hand it over to my co-host Adri, because I know that they recently finished the Henna Wars. Spoiler, they loved it. And they might have a few questions for Adiba as well.
Yes. Hi, Adiba. I loved you both, by the
Hi.
way. It was great. Before I get into what I had prepared, I actually was really curious, since I heard you mentioning that you work as an ESL teacher as well. So how did you sort of find your way from teaching to being a writer?
So I was writing even as I was teaching. So I've like always kind of been a writer. But actually teaching ESL, I think, helped me really write this book specifically. I think if I wasn't teaching ESL, I wouldn't have been able to write this book. When you teach ESL, you meet people from just like all over the world. I met a lot of Brazilian readers, but I've met like Korean, not readers, sorry, students. I've met Brazilian students, Korean students, like a lot of European students, like just people from all over the world. And I think me and my students, we had like a lot of conversations about different things, like politics, religion, sometimes, about their culture, my culture. So I've learned so much from my students. I feel like sometimes I learn more from my students than they learn from me. Um, so it was a great experience, and I think teaching all of these students gave me this specific cultural insight that really helped me write this book. So I'm very thankful for my job as an ESL teacher.
Yeah, I agree. I work in education as well, so I get to interact with a lot of youth, and they're wild and they're beautiful, and I love them and I love working with them. But yeah, so one thing I really loved about the Henna Wars is that it's so layered when you really get into it. So I think it's really interesting that, Nishat is confronting homophobia in the guise of religion, not only from home, but then again at the Catholic school that she attends. So that's a really interesting complication, I think, because it's kind of coming from two different ends. So I wanted to know why you included that. Did you include it because of Ireland's concentrated Catholic community? Because I know there's a lot of Catholics in Ireland. Or like, what was the inspiration for like wanting to set it in a Catholic school?
It was definitely because of Ireland's Catholic community, especially because like I went to a school that is exactly like Nishat's. It was an all girls Catholic school. And like at the time, nobody really knew that I was queer, but I did face like a lot of Islamophobia in general, just from just being in that Catholic school. Actually, like a little background about Ireland is that almost every single school in Ireland is still run by the church. So in my school, we had like this big house outside of our school building, and that belonged to like the nuns. And we even had like a little chapel with our primary school. So like every time, we had like an event, a religious event, we would like shuffle into the chapel. Like our graduation ceremonies, they were all religious events. So Ireland is very, very, very Catholic, even though a lot of the people don't think that they are, but it is very Catholic. So that was definitely inspired by just my own experience. And, I just remember whenever kind of queerness would come up in conversation, because when I went to school, nobody was like out in my year, but whenever it would come out, there would be like a lot of homophobia. And it wasn't necessarily because of the Catholicism, but I definitely don't think the environment helped.
Yes, big mood. As someone who was raised by like very strict Catholics, I know what you mean. We don't have a good track record with homophobia. But yeah, that was interesting because, yeah, it's like you said, it's not the religion itself, but it's like the way it's interpreted and the way it's proliferated is very, very hard. Yes. But something else I loved about the Henna Wars was Nishat's relationship with her sister. I think it's one of the, hands down, one of the best I've seen in any book. And it really reminds me so much of what it means to be a sibling in my own family, like just being all up in each other's space and business and just being idiots together. So I was curious to know what inspired you to write that dynamic the way you did, and why did you choose to make Nishat's best friend essentially her sister as opposed to someone from school or someone already in her friend group?
So I have two siblings, and my relationship with both of them are nothing like Nishat and Prithi's relationship. But I had a very chaotic childhood where I used to live for 6 months in Saudi Arabia and for 6 months in Bangladesh for most of my life until I moved to Ireland when I was 10. And that was a very, very unique experience because even in Saudi Arabia, we had a very unique life, I guess, that a lot of people wouldn't have had. And sometimes I think about the fact that the only person in the entire world who can probably relate to my experience is my older brother because we had that experience together. So I think a lot of the relationship was inspired by my relationship with my siblings, even though it is quite different. But it was also inspired by the fact that I have like so many cousins. Bangladeshi families are really, really big. I think I have at least like 30 or 40 first cousins. So, I grew up with a lot of them. I saw them during my summers in Bangladesh, and I saw the way that they interacted with each other, the way that they interacted with me. So I feel like when it comes to sibling dynamics, I have seen like literally everything. So I feel like I just kind of picked and chose what I needed for Nishat and Prithi's relationship.
Yeah, I loved it. It was great. They have a lot of really cute moments together. Kind of related to like the family dynamic, something you also sort of explored in the story was like how after Nishat comes out, like her parents are very closed-lipped, like do not address, do not talk about it. Like if we don't say it, it'll go away, which I feel like is a very brown thing, shall we say. So like why did you want to include that in the story, and like where did that come from? Was that your own experience, like your, being like, if we don't see it, it's not true?
Yeah, definitely my own experience. I like. I'm glad you said it's like a brown thing because for a long time I thought, is it just like my family? Is it just Bangladeshi people? But my parents, I think if they hear something that they don't want to deal with, is just silence and they just don't deal with it, and you just forget about it and hope it sorts itself out, which is like really unhealthy, but that's how it is. So I like when I was writing it, I was thinking of all the different like I guess coming out scenes I had seen, and most of it is like they're really supportive or they're like get out of the house right now, and I was like if this happened in my house, like that's not how it would go. It would just be like not dealing with it. So for me, that felt the most realistic thing to write.
Yeah, I agree with that because that's definitely the case in my family too, and I think it's the case in a lot of brown families.
Yes.
And I think it's just that we don't grow up communicating about these things. We're not open about these things. Caribbean people are very secretive, so everything is a secret. Don't tell nobody this. Keep it to yourself. So I think we just don't. We just a lot of our families just haven't grown up with the capacity to facilitate these kind of communications. And I'm glad that the Henna was kind of explored that in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying that like especially in like films, like coming out looks a certain way and it's like okay, we're going to cry but then we're going to accept it. It's like that's not what we do as brown people. So I'm glad that you included that. On a different note, this is more of like a design question rather than a writing question, I guess. But what I really appreciate about the Henna Wars is that it has a page of content warnings in the very front. And because of that, I was able to brace myself for the public outing that happens later in the story. So, and I've seen content warnings recently in other new releases, like All Boys Aren't Blue, I think is another good example that has content warnings in the front. And I hope it becomes even more normalized in the industry as we continue forward. But was that something that you pushed for? What was that conversation like? And do you have any advice for fellow writers on how to advocate for something like that?
So I really wanted the content warnings to be with my book, especially because I know that something like a public outing can be really traumatizing for queer people. And, especially because my book is a rom-com. So I don't want people to go in and think this is going to be like super soft and, super cute and happy. And then just like have a public outing in their face and be traumatized. Like I didn't want that. So I really wanted there to be the content warnings. I actually copied my content warnings like structure from Nicole's book because I saw that on Twitter. So her book is called the First Eight, I think. Um, so yeah, I just copied it from her book because she had a content warnings page that I really, really liked. And the way that it actually happened was that my editor asked me for my acknowledgements and my dedication page. And I just emailed her those two things. And I said, I also really want to include a content warnings page. So I've attached like a sample of what this could look like. And I was thinking it could go towards the beginning of the book. Would that be possible? Or, we can discuss some alternatives. And she emailed me back and said, yeah, we'll figure out how to put it at the beginning of your book. So it was just like literally like one email. My editor had no issues with it. Like after that, it was sorted. So I think most of the time your publishers want to work with you. So if you just ask for these things, it can be really scary to ask, especially when you're a debut author and you're scared of like pissing off your publisher. But I think like as long as you just, ask politely, most of the time they will do their best to accommodate you. And I think my advice is that if you are really, really scared of asking, just ask your agent to do it because like I asked my agent to do so much stuff. It's like the best thing about having an agent because they like just do stuff for you and it's awesome. So yeah, like I think you just need to ask and most of the time they will accommodate you. And just have a conversation with them. They want the readers to have a good experience the same way that you do.
I agree, and that sort of echoes things we've heard from past authors here too. They're always saying, ask, advocate yourself, even when it's hard. I think Aiden Thomas put it really well when they said like a lot of people in the industry are scared to ask because they feel like they've been given a gift and they don't want to risk like losing it or alienating themselves. So yeah, I think it is worth hearing that it's good to ask and it's good to be straightforward and tell people what you need because I think we definitely need more content warnings in books because it's really hard as a reviewer to compile them yourself. So it's nice when it's there and it's stated and it's great. So I appreciate that. On a different note, there were times when I was reading the Henna Wars and I like seriously doubted whether Nishat and Flavia would find their way to each other because Flavia's like willful ignorance towards how she's hurting Nishat by appropriating her culture seemed almost insurmountable at times. So I think it's valuable to have those explorations of how people we love can hurt us and can be ignorant of, how their actions affect us, but then they can still also grow. And there were times when, like I said, even knowing this was a rom-com, I didn't know if they would make it or end up together. So it would have been really easy for you, I think, to show Nishat removing herself from this relationship altogether. So I'm curious to know what kept you writing towards the hope and the redemption.
Well, first of all, I knew when I started writing the book that I wanted them to end up together and I wanted them to have a happy ending, because obviously I feel like it's still rare to get happy endings like that, especially for queer girls of color. So I just wanted to give them that happy ending. So I knew that is what I was writing towards. But also, like, I just think people are very complicated. Like, people have complicated dynamics. For Flavia, she had this complicated dynamic with like people in her family that she kind of had to figure out. We're all very complicated people. None of us are perfect. We like all make mistakes, and sometimes they're really bad mistakes, and very insensitive mistakes. I remember when I was a teenager, like, I was not as put together as Nishat. I was probably even more of a disaster than Flavia. Like, I definitely did a lot of stuff that I probably shouldn't have. And like, my friends did stuff like that too. But, most of the time we managed to figure it out. And I think it's important just to navigate how to do that. It's like when your friend makes a mistake like that, I think a lot of us, like, we don't like confrontation. So we just want to be like, goodbye, like, I don't want to see you ever again. But if you value that friendship, it's important to like have those conversations, and figure things out and to grow, like you said. So for me, I think it was just important to be able to show that just because Flavia was kind of struggling with who she was, but also struggling with what cultural appropriation is, doesn't mean that she should be written off. That people can learn and they can grow. And I think especially when you are people of color, you need to give each other like that chance, because like, again, bring up power dynamics. There is this big power dynamic between white people and people of color. So again, if it was a white person doing what Flavia was doing, I don't think Nishat could have had her happy ending. But because it was a brown person, they were meeting each other at a different place. The power dynamics between them was much smaller, so they could have those conversations and they could have a happily ever after.
That's true. That's very, very true. It is different. Yeah, and especially because we often deny second chances, I think, to marginalized people. So it was nice to see Flavia have a second chance and sort of redeem herself. I'm also curious to know, I know you mentioned the gauntlet, but what are some forms of media or art or books that you draw inspiration from as an author? And were there any other stories that sort of inspired you while you were writing the Henamores?
Yes. So the book that I read just before I started writing was To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. I loved everything about it. It was so like voicey, it was so like sweet. And just, I loved that it was like this rom-com about like a Korean girl. I never read that before. And I think I read that book and I was like, wait, like, my idea for a rom-com with a brown girl, maybe I can write that. And I think I put down that book and I basically immediately started writing the Henna Wars. So that was like a big inspiration. Every single book that Sandhya Menon writes is also like a big inspiration in like basically the same way, just seeing, two brown people getting to have romances. Like, I love that. SK Ali, I talk about her at like every single event, every single interview. So people are probably tired of hearing about her, but yeah, SK Ali is a huge inspiration. As like somebody who writes just unapologetically Muslim characters. And yeah, like Karuna Riazi writing The Gauntlet, like that was the first time I ever saw a Bangladeshi character on the page. So that was just like an amazing thing to see. It was just like motivational for me to just say to myself, like, if Karuna Riazi can do it, maybe I can do it too.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Yes, second everything you said about Sandhya Menon's books. They're amazing. And S.K. Ali's books are amazing as well.
And Dimple and Rishi forever. Okay,
Yeah,
we'll keep people alive.
forever. Yes. Um, well, you kind of talked about some books that influenced you, but what are some books do you think are like similar that if people read the Hen Wars and they want to read even more like queer brown stories, like where would you point them?
That's a difficult question. Queer brown stories. Uh, so currently, I'm actually reading. It's actually not similar to the Hen Wars, but I'm reading Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Barron, and it is like I'm like halfway through, and it is amazing. So I highly recommend everybody pick that up. Even though it's like a Cinderella kind of a retelling, so it's fantasy, but it's really good. Definitely, You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. I feel like you could like read the Henna Wars, put it down, and immediately pick up like Leah's book, and that's like the perfect pairing. So I highly recommend that. I haven't yet read Aiden's book Cemetery Boys, but I have an
Don't
arc of
get that
it. So
started.
I'm dying to read it. So I feel like that
Like
would
to
be a
cry.
really
Like,
good book.
I love Cemetery Boys.
I'm really excited to read it. So yeah, I think that would be a really good book as well. In terms of like some non-queer books as well, but they feature like brown people. Again, Sandhya Menon, Jenny Han, S.K. Ali. I would also say like All American Muslim Girl by Nadine Jolie Courtney. It's like such a fantastic book. And I love Nadine as well. So it's amazing. I highly recommend it. I have like my Muslim shelf space just up here so I can see all the books. Um, oh, a book that's coming out, I think in September, is More Than Just a Pretty Face by Syed and Masood.
Right.
And it is like amazing. It's hilarious. Like there are not a lot of books that make me laugh out loud, but with this book, I was like laughing so much. So yeah, that's definitely one that everybody should be looking out for as well.
And can I just say I saw In Other Lands behind you, which is a book that kicks so much ass. And I just wanted to say it's great.
One of my best friends sent that to me like 3 years back when it got published for my birthday, and I still haven't read it.
Oh, it's so
I really
good.
need to read it.
It's so good. It's like if you need like queer joy, like that's the book you should go to.
I've heard great things about it. So.
Since Adri first like started reading about it like 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I see Kathy nodding because it's also her brand. It's also her brand to love In Other Lands. We did have a question from Noria in the chat. It says, a lot of writers who write YA stories tend to sometimes unknowingly age up their characters. So how did you ensure that you kept the voice of your characters true to being teenagers?
Well, I have a little sister who is 16 years old, and I see her every day. And, I think that really helped me kind of stay true to Nishad's character, just because I see my sister all the time. And also because I'm an ESL teacher. I actually teach adults, but I teach a lot of young adults. So they would be like from 18 to like their early 20s most of the time. So I think that really helped me figure out the voice of Nishad, just like knowing a lot of kind of young adults and like speaking to them on a daily basis. So yeah, it was just like taking inspiration again from kind of people that I knew and speaking to them.
Absolutely. That's very important. Yes. Again, that's something I talked about with Aiden. Like to know teenagers, you have to actually know teenagers and interact with them, and they are wild. So I did also want to ask, obviously, because we're all readers here. So like, what was like the last thing you read that totally blew your mind?
That is a difficult question because I haven't been. I'm doing like my revisions for my second book, so I haven't been reading a lot. I actually cannot remember the last book I read. Actually, it was Beyond the Ruby Veil by Mara Fitzgerald. It's out, I think, in November. And it's the most chaotic and the weirdest book I've ever read, but in the most fantastic way. So it's an FF, kind of an FF fantasy. It's a Sapphic fantasy about this girl and this boy, and they decide to, and they live in this town and they don't think anything exists outside of this town. And they have this witch that basically creates water for them. and that's the only way they know how to get water. But then this boy and this girl, they decide to get married because they're both gay. So they and at the wedding ceremony, like the person who makes the witch that tries to make the water tries to take the girl and get water from her blood, and she kills the witch. So now her city doesn't have any water, and she and her friend have to kind of try and figure out what to do, and go beyond the Ruby Veil, beyond their town. It is like pure chaos. It's just such a strange book, but it is so entertaining. It's amazing. I highly recommend it.
That sounds
We have
fantastic. Yes,
we have
there are some
another
more questions in the
question
chat.
from,
Yes.
yes, we have one from Zoya Neela, who asks, do you plan on writing an adult rom-com eventually?
I would love to write an adult rom-com at some point. There was a time like a couple months ago when I was sitting in my bed and I was thinking, I really want to write an adult rom-com, so I need some ideas, but I didn't come up with any at that time. So hopefully I get some ideas for adult rom-coms because I would love to write them.
Nice. I would be 100% here for that. I will be pre-ordering. Okay. Sarah asks, if you were to choose a theme song for the two girls, I assume Nishat and Flavia, which song would you choose for them and why?
So I would choose, this probably isn't a surprise to anybody who's read the book, but I would choose Pink by Janelle Monáe. Basically, when I was revising this book, Janelle Monáe had just dropped Dirty Computer, and I watched the emotion picture and, the Pink music video. It was such an inspiration for me, like seeing two like Black people having like a romantic relationship. It was amazing. And I just think Pink is such like a lovely feminine song about love, and it's so soft. So definitely Pink.
Nice. Okay, I love Janelle Monáe, by the way, too. So we stand the queen. Noria asks, if you can co-write a queer book with another author, which author would you choose and which genre would you write
That's a difficult question.
in?
Who would I choose? I think I would choose maybe Nina LaCour, because I love Nina LaCour, first of all. And I think like our work would kind of complement each other. She writes contemporary and I write contemporary. So I think we could write like a really good romance, actually. But more realistically, I would probably write something with my friend, Farida Abike Iyamide, whose book is Ace of Spades. It's out next year. So her book is very queer. It's a thriller. I think like she writes very dark books, so maybe I could like delve into something a little bit darker with her, and we could write something very queer together.
Nice. I would be 100% yes for that. I love Frida, by the way, so y'all will make an excellent pair.
And can I just say, because we know Sonia Manon wrote an adult rom-com recently, didn't she? So it's like, that could be a collab. I'm just saying.
True. Yeah.
I'm just saying.
That's a good idea.
So while we wait for more people to ask, oh wait, somebody asked question. Oh wait, no, Kathy just asked the author, who's the author of Ace of Spades. Farida, what's Farida's last name?
Abike Iyamide.
Right. What her username? You can find her on Twitter and Instagram. I think it's what's her username?
Farida likes tea.
Right. Farida likes to eat. Yeah.
Likes tea.
Likes tea. Right. I mean, I'm sure she likes to eat too. Okay, so while we wait for more questions, I was just curious. Obviously you can't really, like give too much details for this, but what can you tell us about like some upcoming works or books that you might be working on or drafting? Like, what would you be willing to tell us? Are they similar to the Henna Wars? Do they diverge a little bit?
So currently I'm revising my second book, which is coming out with Page Street in spring 2021. So around this time next year. And it's another Sapphic rom-com. So if you like the Henna Wars, hopefully you will also like this. Right now I'm very much struggling with it, but I do think like it's a very fun book as well. It's a fake dating book. It's about these two girls. It's dual POV. One of the girls is Bangladeshi. She's Muslim, and she's bisexual. And then the other girl is she's Indian Bengali. She is, I guess, culturally Hindu, and she's queer. And the two of them basically have to fake date for their own reasons, and that's the book. So it's very fun, but in the same way that the Henna Wars kind of examines like different like racial dynamics, it does the exact same thing.
I'm ready.
I'm ready. And that when you said fake dating, first of all, like that's like the number one trope. Like let's not get it twisted. That's the number one trope. But now I'm like
really
curious
is.
to know what are some of your other like favorite romance tropes that maybe you would like to write in the future?
Honestly, like I would love to take like every single romance trope that like, you know, heterosexual authors have already done and just apply it to like, you know, like a Sapphic book. I love tropes. I think they're so fun. They're so fun to write. So I would love to do that. But fake dating is like number one. It's up there. Yeah.
So we have a question from Ida Ismail, who asks, what are the challenges that you faced whilst writing the Henna Wars, and how did you overcome them?
Difficult question. I think probably the biggest challenge was unpacking a lot of racism or like homophobia, Islamophobia, because Nishat obviously like faces a lot of that during her journey in the book. And I think while I was writing it, I had to think a lot about the things that I had faced when I was Nishat's age, or even what the things that I face currently. And then I had to unpack a lot of that and consider how could I write that into this book in a way that would be meaningful to readers and a way that made sense to Nishat's story. And actually, like, I learned a lot as I was writing this book as well. Some of the conclusions that Nishat and Flavia kind of come to, it made me realize like that I was kind of coming to these conclusions for myself as well. So it was like just unpacking all of these things that I hadn't necessarily had a chance to unpack before.
Yeah, I mean, and I can imagine because the book is very nuanced in the way that it explores a lot of these different things, and it's very layered. We have another question from Noria, who asks, some writers find themselves subconsciously writing character traits of the people around them, family and friends, into their characters. So did the same happen with you?
Not subconsciously, I consciously chose traits from people that I knew. I think it's important. I think it's important that when you are trying to write, or for me anyway, when you're trying to write a character who feels realistic, that you root them in things that are real to you. So with Nishat, for example, I decided I want to write a character who was completely different from me when I was a teen. So I took like my characteristics as a teenager and I flipped them. And then with Flavia, like again, I was thinking of like all of these people that I knew, many of them Brazilian, and I kind of like chose different things that helped create this character. So I think like when you're trying to write a character, it's important to just think of the people that you know because it helps make them realistic.
Nice. So we have a question from Flavia Louise, who says, okay, weird question, but where did you get the name Flavia from? Do you know somebody with that name? Was it the character's name even when she was Irish white? And Flavia says that she's interested since it's rare for her to encounter her name in books. And I would add to that question and ask, like, how did you end up choosing Nishat? Because I've never heard that name before. So, and I found it to be interesting. So, and I've always been interested in why authors might choose particular names for the characters, if it's like the meaning of the name or anything like that. So, yeah.
So Flavia's name before she was brown and Brazilian was, I think it was something like Catherine. Catherine is a very Irish name, so I think that's what it was. After she was Catherine, she was actually not Flavia. She was Lucia, and the reason why I picked Lucia as a name was because, again, it's a Brazilian name, but I was uncomfortable with it because Lucia can also be like a Spanish name. So it can be like a name that belongs to a lot of different cultures, and the pronunciation actually differs depending on, I guess, where you're from. And then I actually wanted to pick Flavia before I picked Lucia, but the reason why I didn't was because I do know someone called Flavia. I knew them when I was in school, and she was one of my classmates. And I was really afraid that everybody would ask me if I chose Flavia because that was her name. And it was based on her. It's not based on her. I barely knew her when I was in school. But I just really like the name. I think it's a name that people can kind of recognize as Brazilian. And that's what I wanted people to be able to do, to see the name and think, well, this is a Brazilian character. And I hope like I managed to do that. With Nishat, her name was originally, I think her name was Sneha when I read the first draft of the book, and I really hated that name. I'm not sure why. It just really didn't fit her character at all. And I'm not sure how I ended up with Nishat. I just knew I wanted a different name. Priti had always been Priti, and for a while I was debating whether I wanted to name Nishat Priyanka, because in Bangladeshi culture, everybody's names like have to rhyme or they have to match. Like my name is Adiba, my little sister is called Labiba. Our names are like rhyming. It's just something that Bengali people do for some reason. But then I decided not to do it because I hate Priyanka Chopra, and also Priyanka Chopra is like the worst. So I didn't want that association. So Nishat, I think I just found it somewhere when I was like searching for names, and it just fit her perfectly for some reason. So I decided to go with that.
Yeah. And as we were on the topic of names, do you want to like maybe clarify? Because I know a lot of people, I've seen a few reviews and people have problems pronouncing your last name. And I feel like people would probably have pronounced it, sorry, I have problems speaking now. People might probably have problems saying Nishat's name as well. So do you want to like clarify the pronunciations or anything like that?
Mm-hmm. So my name is pronounced Adiba JAIGIRDAR. And then Nishat, and her last name is Ahsan. That's a very difficult last name to pronounce. I'm sorry. So Nishat Ahsan is her name. And then Flavia is Flavia Santos. That's her name. I think Santos might be pronounced a little bit differently if you're like a Brazilian speaker, but I can't pronounce it exactly, unfortunately. But the way I would say it is Flavia Santos.
Okay, cool. So we usually take the last 5 minutes or so of the hour to let the author kind of let you like promote like what books you might have coming out, any events that we might have to look out for, where we could find you on social media, and where we could buy your book. So you could let us know all of those things. I know you talked about your book, that we talked a little bit about your second book, but if you want to like restate like when it's coming out, or if you have any other projects coming out, let us know.
Mm-hmm. So you can find me, first of all, on my website, which is adibajagirdar.com. If you need to reach me, my email address is there, so you can feel free to email me through there. On Twitter, you can find me at adiba_J, and on Instagram, you can find me at DIBS_J. You can buy the Henna Wars. I would recommend buying it from your local independent shop. I don't know what that is, but like it's important to support your independent shops at this current time. I think in the US there's also like bookshop.com, which allows you to support indies, so I'd recommend doing that. Also, actually, I had an event recently with Astoria Bookshop, and they were so lovely, they were so supportive, so I'd recommend also buying from them if you can. And if you're, sorry, I'm just talking about buying this book for a long time, but if you are like outside of the US, you can still buy the book from independent shops, because you can request from your indies and they will order it in for you and they will get it. So I would highly recommend doing that. I've already seen the book in like various European indie shops because people have ordered it in. So do that. Indie shops are there to support you, basically. So make sure you do that. My second book, it's not, the title hasn't been announced yet. Hopefully I'll announce it soon. It's a fake dating book, and it's another Sapphic rom-com. It's out spring 2021, so hopefully sometime May, I'm thinking, but around this time next year, basically.
Okay.
You can add it on Goodreads. If you go on my page, it's Untitled.
It's already a bin. Okay, cool. I'm definitely going to do that.
I'm over there going to do that. Can I just say, because I know Saajid won't plug it, but you had a really great interview with Saajid on their channel, Books Are My Social Life. So if people haven't seen that, you should go see that. And with Fadwa from Word Wonders, and you were joined by Leah Johnson on that one, and it was so pure, and the Sapphic power was so great. So again, if anyone hasn't seen that, you should definitely check those out.
Right, so we do have 5 minutes. So if nobody has any more questions, we could probably end it here. Does anybody have anything else they might want to ask? Adri, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think I'm good. I just want to say thank you for being here, ADIBA. It's been wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, ADIBA, so much for joining us today. Again, if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, because this will be recorded and put on my YouTube channel. So if you're watching this on YouTube, all of the links will be in the description down below. Make sure to go follow ADIBA. Make sure to go buy Behind the Walls or borrow it from your library. Don't steal it. Buy and borrow. Okay. All right. So thanks everybody for watching, and thank you, ADIBA, for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay. So usually the reviewer, the participants could stay back and have a chat if they want to. Now that ADIBA is gone. Does anybody want to talk about any reflections on the session we had, or what they read, or anything like that? Noria, you